Hello and welcome to the Theonlinecu. My name is Bonnie.
And I'm Ben.
And this is our first live show, so we hope you have a right laugh watching it.
Yeah, now tonight we have an awesome lineup for you. We've got Michael, our director, giving us something to chew over and food for thought. We've got our most exciting ever new trick. We're also launching our Uncover series tonight.
Wow, that is something, Ben. Now, our special guest tonight is the minister of one of the churches closest to the campus here at Safford, called The Beacon. His name is Alex, and he'll be doing a talk based on Study A of the Uncover series. It's titled Standing Room Only.
Now, if you have your book, remember to take a look at Luke. That didn't work with my accent.
Seriously, it doesn't work, man. Just stop butting in. Now, tonight, we thought we would, go through and explain what Uncover is all about and go through topics about it.
Yeah, that's right. So just now we're going to have a short film from UCCF, the guys that made the Uncover series, about what it is. So,
cool.
Roll film.
Let's go. Wow, that was quite an intro, Ben, Right, so now we move on to our next section, the new tricks.
Yeah, it's this part of the show where we challenge one of our members to learn something new about things that we'd never have learned before, unless we actually made them do it. So.
Yep, so just to put it into context, Paul, right, he'll be doing the new tricks this time round, and he's a boxer. So, well, just roll film, really.
Wow, man, it's a beautiful day today. Look at the trees and the river.
Paul!
You right, Ben?
Paul!
How you doing, Ben?
Oh, beautiful, man, beautiful. Just out for a swim, as you do. Hey, do you fancy doing something with the Theonlinecu this week?
I don't mind, mate.
Taking like a river dance or something?
A river dance?
Yeah.
So, Paul, tell us what you're going to do for us this week.
This week I'm going to try my luck with some river dancing, mate.
River dancing. Have you ever done any river dancing before?
No, I haven't, actually.
Riverdance is an incredibly successful commercial production that began in Ireland in 1994 as an interval to the Eurovision Song Contest.
Right, so let's see what you can do before you practice. Let's see what you can do.
Okay, I'll try. This is just from what I've seen on a little bit on YouTube. Am I looking good? Am I looking great in this, yeah? Am I looking like a professional, yeah? Oh, beautiful.
Do it again?
Right, okay, so Paul, you've had some time to practice and now you're going to give us you're going to show us how to river dance.
Yes, I am. Yes, I'm going to try my best.
In your own time, take it away.
belly. Start off like that.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, Paul. You've just completed our second new tricks.
Thank you very, very much.
And as a prize, we're going to give you a copy of Uncover.
Okay, cheers.
Go away. Bonnie, you're going to just stay out.
Wow, that was something. Was it you, Ben, in the river? I'm like, what were you doing down there?
Just out for a swim, you know, on a nice Sunday afternoon.
Well, I hope you're wearing a swimsuit, man, because it must look like cold out there. As for Paul, as you know, he's a boxer, but I think he pulled it off. He was saying.
You could even say he pulled it off.
Oh wow! Stop with the punning, Ben. Stop with the punning. But seriously, Paul, I think you did a good job. You're a boxer out of YouTube. You know, kudos to you, man. Kudos.
Yeah. Now, before we invite our speaker, moving on from that, before we invite our speaker up into the studio, we have a food for thought section with our producer, Michael Barrett.
Yep.
And now it's time for Food for Thought with Michael. Someone today asked me to prove that God exists, but surely that is confusing the three types of knowledge that we have in the world today. We have mathematical knowledge, 5 + 5 = 10, rational, logical knowledge. Then there's scientific knowledge, where you have a hypothesis and you carry out an experiment to either prove or disprove it. And then there's personal knowledge. Now, each of these types of knowledge are equally valid, but some people take what is personal and they try and define it mathematically or scientifically. For example, take a kiss. Can you define a kiss mathematically? No, you can't. Can you define a kiss scientifically? Yes, you can. One scientific definition of a kiss is the approach of two pairs of lips with a reciprocal transmission of microbes and carbon dioxide. Not a great chat-up line. Now, a kiss is personal, and God is personal. You do not prove God exists, you experience Him. That's why so many Christians spend so much time in prayer and singing, because that is when they experience God. Huh, that's interesting.
Thank you, Michael, for that. I think it was very interesting what he just said, right? And so right now we're going to go over to our next guest, Alex. So over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Bonnie. Yeah. Hello, Alex. Welcome to the Theonlinecu. Welcome to the.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Here. Yeah, we're going to ask you a few questions before we ask you up to speak. So just to disclaim it, these were written by Elliot. I haven't had a chance to read them, so just bear with me as we.
So blame Elliot. Go on then.
So quick fire. So this is the kind of questions you might be asked within kind of the first day of arriving at Stafford. You know, if you were a fresher.
Right.
Okay. So quick fire. Ant or deck?
Oh, Ant all the way.
Liverpool or Manchester?
Manchester.
Cat or dog?
Dog.
Action Man or G.I. Joe?
Action Man.
BBC or ITV?
BBC.
S Club or Steps?
Neither.
EastEnders or Corrie?
Corrie.
Standing or sitting?
Is that like a scrunch or fold question?
Probably.
Standing.
Sandals, okay. With or without socks?
Definitely without.
Okay. Tom or Jerry?
Tom.
Carling or Carlsberg?
Carlsberg.
Aston Martin or Audi?
Oh, Aston Martin all the way.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Iron Man or Captain America?
Iron Man.
DVD or video? And this could be just because I know it's not an age thing, but you know it could.
Actually, we're mostly iPlayer. Actually,
Okay.
Netflix all the way.
Yeah, this next LP or CD?
Neither anymore. LP. What?
Black or white?
Black.
Left or right?
Right.
UK or what? UK or USA?
UK all the way.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, thank you for that, Alex. Yeah. What section of Uncover?
So this is the first of the studies. So we're
Yeah.
going to have a little think about who Jesus is and the evidence that we've got to make that decision.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to go and take your place, then this is Alex giving us a talk on Uncover A.
So there I was. See, my rugby career was short and sweet. And so I knew that this game was going to be the biggest game I'd play in. It was a charity fixture. A fairly decent player had come to the end of his career, and they had this kind of exhibition match to raise money for his favourite charity. And I knew they were desperate for players because they'd rung me the day before for this big game. But there I was. We'd warmed up, we were ready to play, and we were back in the tunnel about to run out. And then I noticed 2 or 3 players up on the opposition team, a guy I was certain I knew. I recognised him from his back profile. And so I started to give him a bit of banter, you know, as rugby players will. Said something about him carrying a bit of extra weight and he wouldn't be as fast around the pitch as he once was. Well, as this guy's neck bristled and I saw his side profile, I realised it wasn't my mate from a few years ago, but Will Carling, ex-England player and phenomenal captain, and I just called him fat. It didn't bode well at all for the rest of that game. What's the moral of the story? You get someone's identity wrong, you are going to act inappropriately and put yourself in grave danger. Well, who is Jesus? That's a huge question of someone's identity, isn't it? Is he mad? Oh, is he just a mythical figure, fairy tale or fantasy, a myth? Is he just a good moral teacher, or is he God himself? Well, Luke, who wrote these little accounts that we're looking at, Luke had that exact same question, and he sets about to find the answer. In fact, what he says here, if you look at sentence 3, he says, "With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus." See, Luke sets about to explore who Jesus is, to answer this question, well, who actually is he? And did you notice that this ordered and historical account, he says, is written to a friend of his, the most excellent Theophilus? Well, Theophilus is probably not a real person. It's a representative name. In Greek, it means friend of God. So Luke has written this historical and accurate account about Jesus so that we, everyone who reads it, might become friends of God. And one of the people that we're introduced to by Luke early on is a paralyzed man. This is in chapter 5 of Luke, from kind of sentence 17 and onwards. And as we read about this paralyzed man and the events around him, there's 6 surprises that Luke gives us here, which really help us grapple this question of who is Jesus. The first surprise is right at the beginning. It's how popular Jesus' teaching is. So it says, one day Jesus was teaching, and Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there. They'd come from every village of Galilee, and from Judea, and from Jerusalem. There was a huge crowd gathered to hear Jesus teach. That's why they were there. And did you notice it says they came from Jerusalem all the way to Galilee? That's 120 miles. Before there was cars or trains, 4 or 5 days' walk, because they wanted to hear Jesus teach. And did you notice who was there? It said Pharisees and teachers of the law. So you know someone's a great teacher, don't you? When other teachers come to hear them teach. A few days ago, I listened to an interview with Lady Gaga, and the person asking her a question asked something, and she responded by saying what a huge fan she was of Madonna. And I thought, isn't that interesting? How big a megastar must Madonna be if other pop stars are her fans? What a great teacher Jesus must be if other teachers come to hear him teach. So first, how popular Jesus' teaching is, and it's still the same today. The Bible is the most sold book in the world. The second surprise we have is the method by which this paralyzed man gets to Jesus. It carries on. Some men came carrying a paralyzed man on a mat and tried to take him into the house to lay before Jesus. When they could not find a way to do this because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and lowered him on his mat through the tiles into the middle of the crowd, right in front of Jesus. Can you imagine that? This poor paralyzed man, he's carried by his mates, who knows what distance, balanced precariously on a mat, and then when they get to where Jesus is, they can't get in. They try and get in the door, but there's too many people crowded there listening to Jesus. They think, well, perhaps we can somehow wedge him through a window. But again, everyone's crowding, listening to what Jesus is saying, and they can't even get him in through a window. And so these guys use their initiative and they clamber up onto the roof and they kind of shove their mate on the paralysed mat up there as well and begin to break through the ceiling. Can you imagine you're sitting there listening to Jesus teach and suddenly, whoop, bam, great clod of mud slaps down onto your thigh. And you look up and peering down with a big Cheshire cat grin on their face is some bloke looking through a hole in the ceiling, and then he claws away at it until it's big enough, and then balanced, this guy comes down and flap in front of Jesus. Shows how eager people are to bring their friends to Jesus. He's got something that friends want their mates to know about. It's intriguing, isn't it? And then here's the next surprise. It's Jesus' seeming insensitivity to this paralysed man. It carries on the story, sentence 20. When Jesus saw their faith, he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." That seems so insensitive, doesn't it? This man who's paralysed has been laid before Jesus. They're all expecting Jesus to do one of these miracles he's become famous for. And Jesus doesn't talk about the man's pins, but the man's sins. He says your sins need to be forgiven. But you see, what Jesus is doing here is identifying this man and all of humanity's greatest need. Oh, being paralysed, that's a huge need. But man's greatest need, this person and all of humanity, is our sins forgiven. Now, we have to stop a minute here, don't we? Because sins is a really religious word. What does it mean? We might think, oh, it describes people in prison who have done really bad things. Or maybe at the other end of the spectrum, we think, well, it's just those little quirks I have. Oh, one too many beers on a Friday, that's my sin. Or I like to have a little cigarette every now and again, that's my sin. What does Jesus mean? Let me illustrate it like this. Imagine you're one of three mates here in Stafford or wherever you're at uni. And one of your mates, their parents are really rich and they bought them a house to live in at uni, a lovely 2-bedroom house, pristine. Well, the guy who owns the house, he's off for a year in industry. He's not at uni next year. And he comes up to the two of you and says, "Hey lads, I'd love for you to live in my house. Free of rent, it's yours for the year that I'm away." Well, you are thrilled. Free house, in there. Your mate says, one thing, each week, send me a message, Facebook me, let me know what's going on. All right, you say. So off he goes on his year on industry and you move into the house. Now, one of you is a typical student. You don't change your bedding for like 9 months. You never hoover the floor. You move a bit of furniture and chisel a bit out the wall. You don't bother fixing it. That black mould starts to form around the windows. Disgusting. The other one of you, bit of a freak. You keep your room absolutely pristine. It's lovely. You hoover, you wipe down the surfaces, you change your bedding. The end of the year, your friend comes back, the one who's been away, who owns the house, meets you for a pint, looks at you both. Neither of you have done right. Both of you have done wrong, he says. All I said was send me a text each week, keep in communication. Neither of you did that. One of you lived a bad way, one of you lived a good way. The point is you both lived your way and not my way. Friends, that's what Jesus means by sin. It's not whether you've lived your life a good way or lived your life a bad way. It's that you've lived it your way and not God's way. And Jesus says everyone needs that forgiven. It's humanity's greatest need. Here's the fourth surprise. There's only a couple more. It's the Pharisees' anger. The people who hear what's going on, they're furious, but they're not furious at Jesus' insensitivity, but they're furious at Jesus' arrogance. Look at sentence 21. It says this: the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began thinking to themselves, "Who is this fellow who speaks blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" They are angry at Jesus' arrogance. They're saying, if sin is against God, only God can forgive it. How can Jesus dare to say that he's God? And they're partly right. If sin is against God, only God can forgive it. Where they're wrong is this question of Jesus' identity. They don't see Jesus as God. Actually, Jesus is claiming to be God. That leads us to the penultimate surprise, the reason Jesus then heals this man. Sentences 22 and 24 says this: Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked, "Why are you thinking these things in your hearts? Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven or to say get up and walk? But I want you to know that I have authority to forgive sins on earth. So he said to the paralyzed man, I tell you, get up, take your mat and go home. See, Jesus doesn't heal these man's legs because he loves the man. We're not told whether Jesus loved this man or not. He doesn't heal him because he loved him. He heals him because he wants to prove that he has the right to forgive sins. So the action of healing this man's legs proves Jesus' authority to forgive sins. His actions prove his words. I used to love watching WWF wrestling or TNA wrestling. It's called a whole bunch of different things, but you know the one I mean? That awesome American wrestling where massive men, they're like titans or something, pumped full of steroids, weapons of mass destruction bulging out of their biceps, wearing the kind of tightest, obscene spandex you've ever seen, and they face off against each other and smash themselves over the head with tables and who knows what. But before that fight starts, they're both given a microphone, if you've ever watched it. And they stand there and they kind of hurl abuse and describe in words what they're going to do to each other. Oh, I'm going to pull out your spleen. I'm going to crush your skull. I'm going to give you an atomic wedgie. And yet at least one of them will have their words proved wrong. At least one of them is going to be face down on the mat by the end. But Jesus' actions back up his words. The reason Jesus does this God-only miracle of healing a paralyzed man was so that we could know he really does have authority to forgive sins. And here's the final surprise then in this story that Luke gives us. It's how the people react. They're not all about getting the paralyzed man's signature, but they're all about praising God. 25 and 26. Immediately he stood up in front of them, took what he'd been lying on and went home, praising God. Everyone was amazed and gave praise to God. They were filled with awe and said, we've seen a remarkable thing today. Here's the question, friends. Luke's given us an accurate, historical, credible account of Jesus. And he wants us to be able to assess with our own minds from that evidence who Jesus is. The people who saw this event, they left saying Jesus must be God, and they praised him. Who do you say Jesus is? Only you can decide.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much there, Alex.
Thanks so much. We'll be hearing from Alex soon in just a few moments. But before that, you, our audience, if you would like to get any questions, get asking.
Yeah, well, you can get in touch with us on Twitter. We're at Theonlinecu. On Facebook, we're Facebook.com/TheOnlineCU. And I'm told that we're now on ask.fm if you've got any questions, again, with /TheOnlineCU.
Yes, so please get in touch, as we'll be going back to Alex after the short video from Crystal. She's one of the members from the local church, Willward Christian Fellowship.
I remember this one time, a group of, a very small group in our church, probably about 3 of us, decided that we really would like to go into town and start to speak to people about Jesus. We're really, really keen to share the good news about Jesus. And so we met this one Saturday morning and we prayed before we went. A little bit in trepidation, as you can imagine, going up to perfect strangers. But we really wanted to do it. We really felt a heart to tell people about Jesus. And so we ended up in town. And I went off just behind St. Mary's in town, and I saw this guy sitting on a bench, and I thought, oh, shall I go? Shall I not go? But in the end, I decided to man up and go and sit down. I sat down, and he looked a little bit dishevelled, and I said, are you okay? And he said, not really. And so I started to tell him straight away, really, about how Jesus loved him and cared for him, and that I was there because I believe God had sent me to Stafford that day. And at first his head was down and he was looking at the floor and he didn't really respond at all, but neither did he tell me to go away. So I was quite encouraged by that, so I just kept on talking because he hadn't told me to go away. And then at some point, as I was telling him about Jesus and what Jesus had done in my life, his head went up a little bit and he started to turn his head round to to engage, and I could sense that God was at work in him and that he was engaging with what I was saying. And so I continued, and I continued to talk to him, and he said at some point, you know, he said, I've been awake all night, and you know, that's why I look like this. I've not been to bed at all. And again, I just continued, and then he sort of piped up and he said, you know, I used to go to church a long time ago. He said, I used to go to church. He said, I think I'll go back. And I saw a change in his demeanour. It was, instead of being downcast, he now looked kind of brighter. And he said, I think I'm going to go back. And I was encouraging him in that. And I said, you know, God has not forgotten you. God loves you. God is still pursuing you. And I think that's a really good decision. And then the tears started to come down his face as he started to smile. And he said, you know, he says, you're an angel. He said, you don't realise you're an angel. And I thought it meant just because I was talking to him about Jesus. He says, tonight, you know, because I was taking a review of my life and realising that it had just gone very badly wrong. He said, I was going to go home today and commit suicide. And it's really hard to know how to respond to that, except that I was so glad and so relieved that we'd decided, God had laid that on our hearts to do that. And I try to imagine what would it have been like if we hadn't heard God's voice. And yeah, that was a pretty good day.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us, Crystal. Technical hiccups, it is again the first show, so just remember that. And now we've been hearing over the last couple of minutes about some questions that have been coming in. You know, we've got our media mogul sat in the other room taking the questions. I think quite an interesting one that kind of links quite nicely is like, how can you how can you trust what actually it says in the Bible? You know, how can we trust this like account?
Yeah, no, great. That's a really good question. Really great question, actually. I can probably only answer for myself. We all have to come to our own decisions about it. There's lots of reasons why I trust the Bible, the accounts of Jesus, how the older part, what we call the Old Testament, and the newer part are linked together, even though they're thousands of years separated in their writing. We have to trust the scientists as well slightly in this, and there's linguistics and scholars who have worked on the Bible, and almost to a T now they say the Bible could be trusted as a historical document. The thing that convinces me personally is when we read Luke's account or any of the other accounts of Jesus' life in the Bible, they're unashamed to reference people who are first-hand witnesses. And they were written within the lifespan of all those witnesses. And so they deliberately wrote this in a way that skeptics, even enemies of Christianity or Jesus, could have read about these people, gone and found them, they were still alive, and quizzed them. We even have records that some of them were tortured, and no one renounced what was here. Everyone said this is how it happened. Some of those witnesses that are recorded and would have been questioned were Christians, they believed in Jesus. Some were uncertain, some were even enemies of Jesus. People like Pilate, who was actually behind Jesus' murder, still alive when this was written. And when those skeptics, those original skeptics, questioned those eyewitnesses, they said, yeah, these accounts did happen. And that convinces me, you don't give the addresses and the names of eyewitnesses who are still alive unless you know what you've written is accurate. So I'm fully convinced this is true. The question is, from it, who do we make out Jesus to be? What's our decision about Jesus? So great question.
Okay, I'm here, I've had another one in. What does God think of gay people?
Now that's an emotive question, isn't it? And a tough question, and all over the papers and the media at the moment. We're not great as human beings at relating. We react very strongly when it comes to sexuality. So gay or straight or bi or whatever you might be, we end up in our separate camps and little ghettos and don't like communicating together. Jesus didn't suffer from that. Jesus actually was unafraid to speak to people of all kinds of sexualities and sexual preferences, if you like. So we have account after account of Jesus getting in all sorts of trouble with some kind of self-righteous moral people because he spoke to prostitutes, and he spent time with a woman who'd had multiple cohabitating relationships, and he had someone dragged before him, a poor woman who'd been caught in adultery, and he wasn't frightened of these moments. Which is great. That hugely encourages me that Jesus is there for all of us, whatever our sexual history might be. I think, what does God think about gay people? I would actually say that the ultimate answer is he thinks and views people who are gay or straight or bi or whatever in the same way as he views all people, which is three things. One, he sees us all made in the image of God, that everyone was made to express what God is like, to have a truth of God in them. Secondly, that all people are broken, that people don't live rightly and correctly, and need that forgiveness of sins. And sometimes that brokenness is expressed sexually, but often it's expressed in all sorts of other ways. And thirdly, that in Jesus there is available, accessible to everybody, that great forgiveness. And so that's what I think Jesus really thinks about gay people. Great question.
Okay, and I think final one here. Surely, does how we live matter?
Good question. I guess that comes back to that illustration I said about it's not whether we live bad or live well, but it's that we're living our way, not God's way. Of course it matters how we live. Jesus says, love your neighbours. So he wants us to live in a way that loves our neighbours. But it matters in an important way. It doesn't matter in an ultimate way. What ultimately matters is whether we're living God's way or our way. What can matter is whether it's a good or a bad way. Here's an illustration, Ben, that might work. Of course it matters whether our life is at the pits, it's at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, or whether our life is really great at the top of Mount Everest. That matters, there's a difference. But if you're trying to reach the moon, that difference is minute. That's how I'd answer that question.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think that's all the questions that we've got certainly got time for now. Keep them coming in if you have got more questions. We are, over the next couple of weeks, we will try and answer more of those questions that we have. So, yeah. Bonnie.
Well, firstly, thank you for sharing that with us, Alex. I think it was very touching and very sort of, intuitive. It was right there. So thanks for your time, firstly. And for all of you guys out there, this was our first ever live broadcast, and we really hope that you're enjoying it.
Yeah. Now remember, as I said, we'd love to hear your feedback about tonight's show.
So if you guys have got any questions, do not worry about posting it online. Just go forward, and put it out there. We will try and get them in the show and get them answered.
So yeah, thank you, and of course, as ever, you stay classy, Stafford.